worst things that we can deal with as aquarium hobbyists is when we lose our fish. For a lot of new aquarists, this can be the thing that breaks the proverbial camel's back and causes many to quit, sometimes too early. Even some of the more experienced hobbyists have problems where they lose fish earlier than they should. When this occurs, you might be looking at the wrong things to understand where the problem is. So we're going to go over how to figure out why your fish keep dying. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. Before I get into everything, I just want to say a massive thanks to everyone. This channel has grown over many, many years, and one of the best things that you can do to help, whether it's a small aquarium channel or even a big aquarium channel, grow is to like and subscribe. It's something you can do for free, and it helps tell the magic YouTube algorithms that, like, hey, I like this stuff, and maybe someone else will too. Also, doesn't hurt if you drop a comment. So if there's something you learn out of this video, tell me in the comments down below. Recently, I added a bunch of young new rainbows to this tank. I've done this many, many times before, in the sense of adding fish to a new tank, or even an existing tank. Sometimes, when we do those additions, we lose fish, and we will often race to test 3 things and forget about a lot of other things. Of course, the first thing we're going to look at is, did I have an ammonia spike? Maybe my nitrite levels spiked. Or do I have crazy high nitrates? Because even with a severely planted tank like this, nitrates can get a little out of hand. Now granted, the toxicity level for nitrate is quite high, but some fish are more susceptible than others. Often we'll race and we'll go and we'll reach out to a source of grand authority, whether it's content creators or other people, local fish club members, whatever, people you know that have a great amount of knowledge. Maybe it's your local fish store. And you'll come in and go, my water tests perfectly fine, I don't understand what's going on. And often one of the things that I have experienced in my time as a hobbyist is that tests are perfectly fine is ignoring the tests we need to look at the most. So let's go over a few of the things that can cause problems with our fish and why these are secretly more commonly the reason why we lose our fish than anything disease-related or bacteria. Number 1, all of our fish are relatively adaptable. However, very quick changes in some of our water parameters can be extremely detrimental to their health and potentially deadly. One of these that we often overlook is pH. pH is a kind of loose range, and targeting or trying to chase perfect pH often leads to more problems than good. However, we can, over time, get a little lazy about testing our pH or monitoring our pH, and what can happen is, as certain other things in our tank change over time, you can run into certain pH issues kind of out of nowhere. And I say this kind of out of nowhere more like this. Let me give you an example. A long time ago, I was really getting super into rainbow fish. It felt like every couple of weeks I was bringing new rainbow fish home from a number of different places. And because of that, I regularly kept multiple quarantine tanks. One such quarantine tank used to be, and this is going to sound really silly, a small tank between the 2 sinks in my master bedroom. I know, sounds silly, but it was an easy water source. I walked past it frequently, so one of the things I told myself in my head is this is a perfect place for a quarantine tank because I can watch it very closely. I typically do a quarantine tank very bare bottom. I'll usually use like an artificial plant of some form, sometimes a live plant, but I prefer artificial when possible, as a sense of cover, and I almost never use a light. I will use heat and aeration and filtration, but very frequently I run this as a very minimalist setup because I might be using medications or other things, and my goal is not to have these tanks run long term. So I'm doing quarantining, I've got the temperature dialed in, I've got filtration, and all of a sudden I noticed all of my fish were getting these like cloudy eyes. I panic. So what's the first thing I do? I get out my ammonia test kit, my nitrite and my nitrate, and I test them all and they look perfect. Well, what's wrong? So then I start thinking, okay, what kind of disease is it that's going to cause a cloudy eye? So I start looking up furiously on Google what kind of disease causes cloudy eyes in fish. And I get this list of all sorts of crazy things. I start thinking, oh my God, it's probably one of these. I better go buy some medicine. And I took a moment. I sat back, thought to myself, is there something I'm missing? And I sent a message to a friend. Now, this was relatively early in me coming back into the hobby. and I was buying stuff a little too fast and loose, and my worry was I bought sick fish from a store. This was a store I'd never bought from before, I didn't know their quarantine practices, etc. My friend goes, "Have you checked your pH?" And I went, "Well, like, the pH is really stable in all of my tanks. It's usually about 7.4 to 7.6. And he goes, "Yeah, but you have nothing in this tank, right? And all the other tanks have plants, and they have some rock, and they got other stuff, right?" Well, yeah. He goes, "Check your pH." Well, that sage person, Master Breeder Dean, was right. Because of my water has like no carbonate hardness in it, no KH. And what can happen very easily for my particular water in the Seattle area is the buffering capacity that keeps the pH stable can basically just fall off a cliff. And as you have the natural processes that occur and there's nothing else in this tank to stabilize that, there's nothing in my water, so the pH can just go boop. And it turned out when I tested the pH, it was under or at 6.0. Now, these are rainbow fish. Rainbow fish do not like, at least for the most part, there's some exceptions of course, but rainbow fish for the most part do not like fairly acidic water. And that was affecting their slime coat negatively, but it wasn't a disease. So we do a few water changes, we add a small little bag of crushed coral in there to help buffer everything. It's gone within a few days. They're all doing fine, no issues from there on out. pH, it's the first thing you should check. And especially if you keep regular testing, what you want to watch for is a swift change in pH. So if you normally have your tank at say 7.4 to 7.6, and all of a sudden it goes up to over 8, or maybe it drops down to under 7 into the mid to low 6s, this is where you want to start doing water changes and potentially look at other things to kind of stabilize that pH back to where it is. Because sudden changes in pH, especially bigger swings, for many fish, but not all, can be quite detrimental. Number 2, similar thing. I talked about how there's no carbonate hardness in my water, and that caused a pH crash. GH and KH matter. We should be testing for these things fairly regularly, especially when we're looking at new fish. Why? Similar to what happened with my rainbow fish, you could run into issues with slime coat or all sorts of other things that cause stress on the fish's body. And as the fish gets stressed, their immune system response goes down and they become more susceptible to the natural bacterias that exist in our aquariums kind of no matter what. And that's when they can get sick. The cause of the problem is not necessarily the bacteria. That just tends to be a symptom of the actual problem. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you do get truly sick fish. But very often what happens is that stress from going in a bag, coming to a new tank, and then sometimes those shifting different parameters that we don't always test right away can cause that extra stress and thus cause our fish to get sick and or die, because some fish are significantly more susceptible to these things. And the example I would give you here is not a fish, but rather shrimp. Caridina shrimp, like your black crystals, your red crystals, all those kind. They do not like having a high amount of carbonate hardness, KH, in their water. So if you treat them like neocaridinas, and you use a GH and KH buffer, or you naturally have high KH and GH in your water, and you put them in, you might have all your shrimp die and not realize that it's like, oh, hey, I did a dumb. I put my shrimp that do not like KH at all in an environment with too much KH. That's why they passed away. They're not sick. They're in an environment that's not healthy for them. And this is one of the things that I think more often than not causes problems between pH, KH, and GH with our fish. The third one I want to talk about, temperature. Unfortunately for us, one of the most common pieces of equipment in all of the aquarium hobby to fail, heaters. And most of us keep fish that like warmer temperatures and don't do so well if those temperatures fall off and crash. Or worse, some heaters, when they malfunction, will now cause electrical current in the water and quite literally be shocking your fish to death. Kind of scary, right? But one of the things we should always be doing amongst our many tests is temperature checking. Most people will use a thermometer. My general suggestion to you is go get yourself a temperature gun. They're like $16, $17 on Amazon. I think the most I've ever paid for one is like $20. They last you years. It's a really easy way to temperature check your water, your aquarium, whatever you want to do. I use them all the time when I'm doing water changes to get my water in a certain temperature zone. If I want cooler water for my plecos when they get their water changes, I can dial it down and use that temperature gun really quick. If I want more stabilized water, back when I used to do rainbow fish raising and I had a lot of fry, I wanted my water as close to perfect in the same temperature as possible. So I'd run in, check my tank, come back to my tap, and slowly dial it in to get it within about half a degree of temperature. These things are an amazing tool, and monitoring the temperature in your aquarium is going to be the difference between life and death in many occasions with a lot of our fish. And one of the reasons that I really bring this home is, let us say you go to your local fish store and you pick up a fish, or you pick up 10 fish, maybe you pick up a bunch of tetras, and they have their tanks at 80 degrees. Not hot, but warm. And you come back to your tank, and your tank's only like 72. Well, if you don't acclimate those fish slowly and correctly, that temperature shock has a risk of potentially killing your fish, or more likely causing stress on the fish, which then again reduces their immune response and makes them more susceptible to the bacteria that they're naturally good at fighting off that just always exist inside our aquariums. Check your temperature. This is one of the other ways that you can detect problems. Like if your heater breaks, it might get stuck on all the time. And what you might be like is like, my fish tank's always 76 degrees. I've got this amazing heater. It's dead on. I never have problems. You check your temperature and all of a sudden it's 84. Oh, that's not good. So check your temperature. That's number 3. And if you do notice that something is wrong with your heater, maybe it's too low or too high, consider completely unplugging the heater and removing it, as there is a potential with some heaters, especially the ones that burst a little, get a crack, whatever, that by exposing those elements, they could be electrically discharging into the water. We talked about getting a grounding probe in aquariums in a video in the past. This is one of the best things to protect you from those if you happen to need a lot of heaters and you can't just like heat the room. One of the last ones I want to talk about in general, and I've kind of alluded to this a bit before, is stress in general. Whether it's shipping or transport, all these things cause little amounts of stress to our fish. And some fish are naturally more susceptible or panicky when it comes to those stresses and can cause all sorts of problems. Rainbow fish are kind of one of those fish. They stress out very, very easily and they can get very panicky. Now, for the most part, what I tend to see in rainbow fish is they start getting jumpy and they start trying to fly out of that tank. So in those cases, get a lid. Sometimes you'll see a fish swimming off by its lonesome, and usually they're stressed. And again, this goes back to that same thing. As they get stressed, as they have problems, their immune system suffers, and that can make them weaker. And that's typically when disease comes into play. This is like ick and some of those more common diseases. This is what makes them most likely to occur, because a lot of those just kind of exist in the water at all times anyway, and the immune system is very good at fighting it off persistently. But sometimes those little stressors come in, the immune system gets weaker, and that's when they become susceptible, and sometimes that's when sickness occurs. In that case, when you're bringing home new fish, try to acclimate them in a way that is a little slower and safer, so there's not some kind of temperature shock, there's not some other kind of change. Maybe they're going from significantly harder water to softer water, or vice versa in your tank. That's when things like drip acclimation are your best friends. It's a really common process. There's tons of videos out there about how to do drip acclimation. There's lots of ways to reduce the amount of stress on your fish as they're getting into your aquarium, and also monitoring them through the first couple of weeks. If you're seeing them hide a ton, maybe consider dimming your lights down or even having them off completely for a few days to give those fish a more relaxing time to adjust to their new environment. Maybe your tank isn't quite as dense as this thing, where there's not as much room to hide, or you've just got little beggars like this who always beg for food all the time, but sometimes that new human coming into the room is very stressful. Find ways to reduce that stress, right? This helps. Sometimes when we bring a new fish in, one of the best ways to reduce stress is to feed them kind of like treat food. And my example here would be something like frozen baby brine shrimp, live hatch baby brine shrimp. A lot of your different frozen foods, Cyclops, Daphnia, all these things, they're really, really healthy foods. They're really good for your fish. And other than like pellets and flake, because they're kind of a nicer quality food, it can sometimes help get your fish a little more adjusted, a little faster, because they're like, hey, I'm getting a lot of really good food. I kind of like it here, man. This is some nice digs. They treat me quite nice here, right? Those kind of things can matter a ton for helping your fish settle in, reducing stress and reducing the likelihood that you lose your fish. That's just a few. There are many other things that we often do not look at. So here's one of the other ones that's a little harder to test for, but it's something that we can visually look at. Aeration. Sometimes you can have not enough air in an aquarium, and often the easiest way is that you're going to see fish regularly at the surface trying to gasp, or maybe you don't see a lot of surface agitation, or you're not running any air stones at all. This is a risk that can cause a number of different problems. But also, if you have a fairly new tank, some of the similar things you'll see is that the tank isn't fully cycled and or put too many fish in at once, and it's causing too much stress to your filtration, and that can lead to ammonia spikes and other things. However, they don't always register on a test right away. So one of the things we want to do is, have we taken the time to cycle our tank before putting fish in? And if we're going to have 30 fish, maybe we add those fish 10 at a time. Maybe we do them 5 at a time, and we just slowly add fish over time rather than putting all 30 in at once. Because all of a sudden you've got a lot more waste coming into your system, and all these other little stressors and shocks that can occur, where if you bring in a small number of fish over time, it can be significantly easier, not only on the aquarium, but on the aquarium's ability to do things. If you're using lots of aeration, probably not an issue, but it's always good to have a little extra air running around, whether that's some surface agitation, an extra sponge filter, just an air stone. I'm actually running 2 different air stones in this tank, despite having a canister filter, which causes quite a lot of surface agitation. And I've got lots of plants producing oxygen, but I like being very thorough about the amount of oxygen in my aquariums because my particular fish tend to come from heavily oxygenated areas like streams. This is one of the other things that you can look at, and these are little things that we need to take into account. And really what this all comes down to is one thing, well, 2 things: patience and observation. Whenever we bring new fish into our aquarium, it is really important for us to not, 1, rush, take your time. Waiting 2 extra weeks to let your tank cycle, or even a month, is going to be so much easier to handle than rushing, putting your fish early, and then watching them die and get sick, whatever it may be. Trust me, I know from experience. I got too excited in one of my first tanks when I came back into this hobby, and I lost all of my cardinal tetras because I rushed. And when I started telling myself, slow down, take it easy, I had significantly more success with my fish. But even someone like me, who sits here and babbles about fish every week, will still have problems every once in a while with my fish. And that's where the number 2 comes in, that observation. Watching for any little signs, different behaviors, coloration starting to wash out when it doesn't, a fish not eating very much. These are all signs that I should test all the things in my water, make sure my temperature is okay, my GH, my KH, my ammonia, my nitrite, my nitrate, right? All of these things are good to test. Looking at my equipment, making sure my heater is okay, making sure my flow is right, my oxygenation is good. And then after all those things, then I might consider, is there a chance there's some kind of disease or maybe another fish too aggressively pursuing that fish, causing other stresses that are then causing that fish to behave differently and show signs that a problem might be brewing within my aquarium. Observation and patience are your best friend, especially if you are a new hobbyist. Really paying attention can help clue you in significantly earlier and help stop problems before they fully blossom into catastrophe. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's something that we regularly run into. Even as more experienced aquarists, we're going to run into problems with our fish. And sometimes we overlook some of the simple fundamentals of how to understand where the problems are before they become bigger issues. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.